Joining me live now is the new Shadow Defence Minister, James Paterson. Thanks for your time, James Paterson. I can hear some background noise behind you there at the park, but let's start with the 15% temporary tariff Donald Trump has announced overnight after the Supreme Court knocked back his 10% tariffs. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's regrettable and unfortunate as it relates to the Australia-US trading relationship. It's contrary to our free trade agreement and the spirit of our friendship between our two nations. I would hope that the President consider an exemption for Australia from that tariff, and I hope that the Albanese government, with their new ambassador, Greg Moriarty, shortly to start in Washington DC, are able to secure that exemption for Australia.
So you've been announced as Shadow Defence Minister this week. Is that a post you sought? Why didn't you stay in finance, a position where you could have been part of the all-important economic team for the opposition?
Well, we're going to have a very strong economic team under Angus Taylor, including Jane Hume, Tim Wilson, Claire Chandler and many other colleagues. And I'm very happy to be stepping back into the national security space, which is an area I've focused on for much of the last 5 years. I think some of the biggest, most existential questions facing Australia that will determine whether our children and grandchildren inherit a sovereign liberal democracy from us are going to be decided in defence and national security portfolios. The truth is that 4 years into the Albanese government, they've cut more capability than they've invested in, and we're still only spending 2% of GDP
I'll get to
on
that.
defence. We're now best informed.
I'll get to that. I just want
to,
James Paterson. I just wanted to ask you though quickly again. Did you seek the role, or did Angus just say, "Can you do this"?
Well, it's a matter for the leader who serves in any portfolio, other than the deputy leader who has their choice of portfolio. I was delighted to be asked to serve in the defence portfolio. OK.
Claire Chandler in finance then. She's 35. She's said to have been someone that you've mentored in the past. What can you tell us about her?
Well, I am a strong supporter of Claire Chandler. I think she's a great talent for our party. She worked for an accounting firm for about 5 years before she entered the parliament, so she's incredibly numerate. But she's also someone who's shown a lot of courage and a lot of foresight, frankly. During the pandemic period, when we were in government, when there was a lot of government spending, Claire stood up in the party room in an act of courage and said, "I think we're spending too much and I'm concerned about the intergenerational debt burden." And of course, this government over the last 4 years has made that problem even worse. We are now on track to cross for the first time a threshold of $1 trillion of gross federal government debt. And Claire, speaking on behalf of her generation and younger Australians, will be loudly putting a spotlight on the Albanese government's fiscal failures, which have led to that.
There's been some chatter about the whole deputy setup. Jane Hume is the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. Andrew Hastie is the deputy leader downstairs in the House of Representatives. So when Angus Taylor's away, he would take the main seat. And Jane isn't even the Senate leader. Micaiah Cash is. So how does this all work?
Look, this is not unprecedented. In 1989, when Fred Chaney was elected by the party room to be the deputy leader from the Senate, a lower house member, Wal Fife, then the member for Hume, later the member for Farrer, funnily enough, was appointed as deputy leader in the House of Representatives for chamber purposes. It is important in terms of having precedence of the call, being able to stand up at the dispatch box and get the call from the Speaker of the House, to have someone who serves in that role. And I think Andrew, along with Dan Tehan, who'll be our manager opposition business, will be a formidable team in the House of Representatives, taking it up to Labor, who have a very significant majority, and not allowing them to abuse that.
We haven't spoken on air for some time, including this meeting, since this meeting you had with Andrew Hastie and Angus Taylor in Melbourne, where you basically outlined to Hastie that Angus Taylor had the numbers and not him. Andrew Hastie has been a friend of yours. What was the reason for your decision to choose Angus Taylor over Andrew Hastie, and what happened in that conversation?
Andrew, you won't be surprised that I'm not going to go into private conversations with some of my closest colleagues and friends. I will say, though, given that there's been such a lot of public reporting about it, that many of the things that were said to happen in that meeting did not, in fact, happen in that meeting. For example, I never called anybody in that meeting to ask them about who they supported. It was a good and respectful discussion, but it was just one of the inputs into the decision that Andrew Hastie subsequently made not to stand for leader, and I respect and support his decision.
Why did you choose Taylor over Hastie, though? Was it just an experience question?
Well, I don't think it's really helpful to me or my friendships or the Liberal Party to publicly canvass that, except to say that I have a very high regard for both Angus and Andrew. They are two of my very closest friends in the Parliament. I'm delighted to see them in the positions they are now. I think Angus is going to give us a real fight against the Labor Party in this very difficult period for the Liberal Party, and I'm particularly pleased to see Andrew back on the front bench, particularly in a portfolio like industry and sovereign capability, which has been smashed onto this government's watch over the last 4 years, particularly if they've pursued net zero with such ideological vigour. It's done enormous damage to our manufacturing industry in particular, and who better than Andrew Hastie to travel around the country and make that point?
Do you feel like a kingmaker?
That's not a title I've ever sought for myself. Frankly, I think it's been overblown in some of the media reporting. My focus is on the new responsibilities I have as the Shadow Minister for Defence to make sure that our country can defend ourselves.
We're getting poll after poll here where people are going to One Nation. What makes you so confident that Angus Taylor can arrest this slide?
Well, it's not something that's going to be fixed very quickly. It's not going to be something that's going to be fixed overnight. And the first and most important thing we have to do is acknowledge that many of our former supporters who are right now parking their votes under One Nation when they're asked in a poll have good reason to be dissatisfied and frustrated with the Liberal Party. They have been saying to us that they don't understand what we stand for, that it's not clear what our purpose is, that we appear divided. And we have to demonstrate that, in fact, we are very clear about what we stand for. We're very clear about who we're fighting for. We're very clear about what our priorities are, and that we present a united and cohesive front, both within the Liberal Party and within the coalition with the National Party, if we're going to earn back that trust and support, which will take time.
What are your fears out of the South Australian election in terms of what could happen to the Liberal Party there?
Well, obviously, the polling coming out of South Australia is very dire, and it's understandable on some levels, given the circumstances, given the issues with previous opposition leaders at the state level in South Australia, given that Premier Malinowskis is one of the most popular state premiers in our country, if not the most popular state leader in our country. But I've got to pay immense credit and respect to Ashton Hurn for the way in which she has stood up in the most difficult circumstances. That is not something that any person in their sane mind would seek, but she has stood up and taken responsibility. And I think she's brought real energy and drive to the South Australian Liberal Party, and I wish them all the best.
You're saying no one in their sane mind would want to be South Australian Liberal leader?
Yeah, I mean, look at the circumstances, look at the polls. It was a very discouraging time to step up, and it's a great credit to Ashton Hurn for the fact that she's been willing to do so, and that she's brought such drive and energy to the leadership of the South Australian Liberal Party over the last few weeks.
Do you think they could get wiped out there?
Well, I certainly hope not, but the polls are very discouraging. And I think South Australians have to think very carefully about what they want from their parliament after the next state election. Do they want a premier and a government that is completely unchallenged, that has no checks on their power? Do they want minor parties having the largest voice in the future of the South Australia? Or do they want a strong and stable opposition that can take it up to the South Australian government, that can hold them to account for their failures, particularly when it comes to things like hospitals and ambulance ramping, which they promised that they would fix?